This video is sponsored by The Dark Side. Okay, hola all, welcome back to Soul Mechanics and to the conclusory installment of the Bad Guy series for the Approaching Nowhere course. Before we begin, several little updates and such. It's my beautiful, wonderful niece and our blessed receiver's birthday. Happy birthday, Madame Veda Ray. B, obviously we're kind of working on trying to work out the lighting issue. Normally we just work with the lights that we have at hand, and they're not suitable. It really pisses Cheeks off, so hopefully she'll be happy with some of the utilities that I brought into play. Kind of clip-on lights and such, but also we are in the process of plotting a network-wide event, collaborative event with all the groups and hopefully the channels as well, to get involved in just generally a promo event, but primarily to promote the groups, to promote the endeavor in general, to promote the initiative, and to promote this particular investigation and what will eventually become the social experiment that we intend to launch once we have developed a broad enough reach to accomplish it successfully. One last thing, we are recording at a lower resolution in hopes that it will solve the space issue, so anybody who's like one of those graphics buffs, of people who will discard your video if it's not up to par with the highest resolution. Too fucking bad. I mean, this channel's about sending a message, and we are going to work with the editing, we are going to work with the graphics and the video quality, we're going to work with improving everything. As I stated, we put our mettle to the test on that one in the comedy video. Hopefully you guys like that. I don't know, you haven't given me feedback on it, which kind of sucks. Give me input here, let me know what you think, please. Anyways, so to kick off this video, something that I noticed that is particularly what becomes the most particularly disturbing aspect of everything is what seems to be kind of like a sacrificial factor involved in generally living, but overall in the initiative particularly. And anybody who's kept up with any of the leads that I put into the previous video in the description, you'll see some of the examples of what we're speaking to here with the ANE and the overall just negative engagement protocol, as it were, the algorithm for negative engagement as it presents in the human psyche overall, in the general psychic environment, you could say. Which, of course, our initial deeper than you think investigation with the Greta Thunberg thing was speaking to the nature of the psychic environment and our psychic environmental crisis. So that's just kind of a continuation of that, wherein we're working on identifying the actual villain in play as regards that story. And as stated, if you followed some of the leads that I put, you'll see examples of this, like this dude who made the McCamey Manor thing, where he's like, pretty much he's torturing people. He's like upping the ante on how poorly he can treat people in this what's supposed to be a fun house, like a haunted house. What are they called? Like an amusement park sort of thing, really. But apparently, if you watch the video that I linked, you'll see that this dude had eventually gotten to the point where he was not allowing for people to leave when they wanted to. He was essentially torturing people, pushing them beyond their limits and holding them hostage for the most part, in some cases at the promise of money that would be a promise of a reward, a cash reward that was not even available to begin with, let alone ever gleaned by anybody. So, I mean, that's an example of how far these things can go. The media allowed that. People allowed it. People loved it. And there's even communities, like a cult following for this McCamey Manor thing, which I'm gonna go ahead and say I think I could beat that. I would love to try it, but I'm a crazy person. Anyways, then there's also the trend with the emo thing, and I'm not gonna say I have anything against emo people or you know, their culture, their community, or what have you, but I will say that there's a very disturbing standard being set in this, and I know it's been going on for a long time. This is not news, but I don't think people are really catching the reality of it, wherein, you know, it's become trendy to be depressed. It's become trendy to be victimized. We have this with the BDSM culture. We have this with the, you know, the, what are they called? The non-binary people who are basically defining themselves as being victimized. And this is a trend. It's not only a trend amongst them, but it is, in fact, it's rewarded in some sense to fit in to that cultural, you know, criteria, but at the same time it's punished to not. Like, if you're an ordinary heterosexual someone, what they call a cis, which again is a term that does not fit, you're punished for it. You're outcast, and you're in fact assaulted, you know, in many ways. Like, I find myself assaulted in comment sections all over YouTube. I'm not going to whine about it, but they do. They whine about my opinion on the matter, you know, and they'll start fights. They'll start what seems to amount to debates, but it's pretty much people throwing fits about their outlook not being tended to in the way that they would like for it to. And basically the problem I have in that particular circle, and those circles, is they are promoting victimization. And I'm not going to say, like, I don't think that this is their fault. I don't think they're deliberately doing this. I think they're totally missing it altogether. I think that they honestly believe themselves to be victimized in some way, and of course some of them are, but it's not going to be the norm. Most of these people are not going to be actual victims of any, you know, any actions that should leave them bereft of such dignity as to be constituent in and of themselves. I mean, these people, they identify as victims. And again, we've spoken of the nature of the victimization complex in play, how people are essentially, firstly, they're going to be addicted to dividing, to segregating themselves, to isolating themselves, to declaring themselves as being segregate from some other factor of the community or culture. And then secondarily, in these cases, they're going to be defining themselves as being victimized by those who outlie that particular isolate factor. So it's a measure of people factioning and feuding in this sense. It's just furthering this division complex, and we have in fact identified what some of the sources for this are, where this comes from, and how it's reinforced via indoctrinations and cognitive dissonance. You know, we do know a great deal about this, but the problem is that it's precisely that. These indoctrinations, this cognitive dissonance comes into play, and it won't allow for people. It takes the psyche hostage. And just as the initial endeavor that produced it had taken the world hostage, had taken humanity hostage, and, you know, I'm going to go outright and say it, of course, it's modern religion that had done that to begin with, but it's not so simple as identifying modern religion as the culprit. It's an inherent programming behind it. It's the system that allowed for that to become so prevalent. It's like a systemic virus of sorts in the human anatomy, in the overall psychological anatomy. And I am very much so viewing it as being a sort of a psychological illness. And I mean, we have that is in fact the case, and I think that whomever may be responsible for promoting this, for maintaining the establishment of this particular predicament, understand that it will come across as being a psychological ailment, and so they've gone so far as to back that by producing this stigma upon the very approach of mental illness in and of itself. So we just have this very threatening phenomenon transpiring here that I don't think it's so, as I've said, it's so simple, it's so subtle, it's so everywhere that people don't even notice it happening. And this is in fact produced and maintained by what we could see as being kind of a counterpart to the conscience factor, wherein people believe that they have this conscience. It's kind of like the higher self or the God presence speaking to them, you know, the still small voice within that's pushing them to do what they believe is right, or what they feel is right, or what, you know, society generally assumes is to be considered right or correct or appropriate. And you know, you have that voice inside, you have that part of yourself that's pushing you to be better, to do better, to be good to others, to be kind, to follow whatever rules you believe are set in place. But at the same time, where I said that, you know, if an option becomes available, your psyche's going to register that option as being a choice that you've made, because it understands that it is in fact your choices that put these options into play. There's nothing that doesn't, nothing exists without a reason. Everything happens for a reason, but people see that backwards. They think that it's like, well, if something happened, it's because of a reason that's going to transpire thereafter. Of course, that is the case. We see that with synchronicity. But at the same time, it's more the case that whatever has transpired has a reason backing it. A reason produced it. And wherein, you know, we find ourselves with these cases of people promoting these tendencies of division, victimization. When these options become available and people do in fact become addicted to them, as I spoke to in the previous video where we had that person that attacked my position for no reason whatsoever, just because it seemed to be an addictive property in them, it's going to be reinforced by the investment. And it's going to be, the psyche's going to fight to reinforce that. It's going to fight to push whatever that maniacal option is, whatever the wrong choice is. There's going to be a part of your mind that's convincing you, swaying you to do that. And we could see that as being the opposite of the conscience. We could see that literally as being what amounts to religion's idea of a devil character or Satan character. So in a manner of speaking, this character, this caricature of an evil presence is in fact a real thing. It exists. But I mean, at the same time, it's still the same thing. It's just the psyche reinforcing what it believes to be a choice made by the recipient or the receiver. So you, as the conscious observer, the receiver, are just being swayed one way or another by the psyche that you're utilizing, the tool set you have, your mental inventory. And when people start to forfeit responsibility and thereby become less aware, less awake, less conscious, what we see happening here is what I stated as being kind of like a pawn that's just being played by this maniacal factor, this diabolical impulse, as it were. And in this case, we have people that will forfeit their very consciousness altogether and just play, you know, just allow for the world to play them and be played in this way, and go so far as to fight against others who try to awaken them to this fact, who try to provide them some measure of lucidity, sway them back towards the conscious side where they're deliberately acting of their own will. It's essentially like the removal of free will is what it seems to be. People having their very souls plucked out of them, you know, and it's very much amounts to what people with the simulation theory communities are going to say is being an NPC, you know, a non-player character, somebody who doesn't really have any deliberate consciousness or awareness in play, who isn't really making decisions for and of themselves. And we see this happening. I mean, it's not, as I've stated before, it's not possible for a person to exist bereft entirely of a psyche. It's the psyche what produces and maintains the physical environment in and of itself, insofar as we can tell. And again, the principles of quantum mechanics backs this. We see this is what science is presenting to us. Yes, that is the case for those who would argue. Such as Demi, who would make a 40-minute video trying to say how stupid it is for us to make such a suggestion, where in fact it is The fact of the matter as it stands, the very vanguard of science has proven this to us, to some extent. I mean, none of it's actually proven rock solid. There is no absolute situation that we can discern as yet. But it very much does seem like people forfeit their responsibility, their sense of self, their sense of presence, and their very consciousness to some extent, and become what amounts to a non-conscious being, just being played by the values at work. And I've stated before, your body does in fact move around on its own. You're the conscious factor making decisions. You're putting values into play. You are determining which way the body goes, but the body does just go. And so it's very much so possible that a body could just be wandering on its own without technically a mind. And we've proven this with the SSRIs, wherein I've stated that I've even run full shifts at work without being awake. I slept walked through it, and we have a video that I produced as a lead in the last video regarding the short film called Sleep Work that displays this perfectly. Where, I mean, that's a work of fiction, obviously, but it's an example of the concept in play that this does happen. People do sleepwalk whole circumstances, do people sleep work, people sleep live. It can happen, and it's very much possible that it could be happening altogether. And where we've spoken to this manipulative factor in play, the indoctrination, the social programming, as it were, what sprung forth from the whole idea of the MK Ultra experiments and all of that jazz with the mind control, the thought text, as we've spoken to, what ultimately amounts to our system of spot casting in the end, as at a deliberate measure. But it seems that, and again, I'm going to state that I don't know if this is deliberate or intentional at all. I think that it may very well be accidental in a manner of speaking, but at the same time it's going to be deliberately accidental because, again, there is a reason backing it. There's a reason producing the circumstance. So it very much seems that initially this system of indoctrination, and we'll call it a system of indoctrination, we won't refer to it as being religion specifically. Religion is just the vehicle by which it was introduced to the system. Its initial factor, or its initial insert, its initial programming, the initial construct behind it, or purpose behind it, was to separate the self from the soul, to separate the self from the concept of God, to separate the self from nature and isolate the self. And then this moved further into becoming what amounts to atheism, which is a person dedicating themselves to that separation, dedicating themselves to that isolation, being completely, the wool pulled completely over their eyes, fooled by this religious factor, this indoctrination, into actually decidedly becoming detached, removed, isolate. Then it seems that it could very well be moving further, like we see with the purplers, who have the patterns that they can't break. Regardless of how aware they are of them, they can't seem to break these patterns. We've seen them do it on occasion, so we know that this can be turned around, and that's what we're working at here with this experiment, with this investigation. We're going to turn this around overall, but it very much seems to be that it could be moving towards complete removal of the entity altogether, having the body just moving about of its own accord, perhaps following cues and prompts that are placed, essentially spot casting that's placed upon them by some handler of sorts, which, I mean, I know that sounds kind of like conspiracy theory, but I mean, you're going to find, if you dig into it, you're going to find that a lot of this shit is true. The conspiracy theorists are not crazy. Well, some of them are crazy, but a lot of it is in fact correct. It's not only correct, but it's brazen. It's right out in the open, wide open in your face. You can't miss it if you got eyes on your head. So we see that transpiring, but the most disturbing factor that I see transpiring, what gets me at the heart, is that people, especially operatives of the initiative who came here for this endeavor, they didn't come here without intention, without a purpose. It's like the story, as it seems to be playing to me, what I saw when I was in the ether and I'd seen this other person assault me in the way that she had, it's like the person that I thought she was, the person she presented as, wasn't really there. It was just mimicking the concept of this person, the design of this person, this personality that she was presenting. It was a mimicry, and essentially she was just, insert name here, parroting parroting this person, this idea of a person, but the person itself wasn't really there, and may never have been there, at least in my experience, was never there, and must at some point have been lost altogether. And we have to have in mind the idea that perhaps it's irreversible. In such cases, somebody could go so far as to be completely lost for good, and essentially that's like a true death. That's like an actual identity death. And it's very much, it seems like people come here with such promising, such promising design, such promising intent, but they're lost to it, and they have to have known what would happen. It's like they knew full well what they were signing on for, yet they stepped into play knowing full well that the game would defeat them. It's almost like having committed suicide before you even began your life. It's like just giving up on the game before you even play. But we have other cases, and I'm going to put a lead here in this video for one of these that we'll be working with further going into the future, where people have actually lost their lives in such a way as to result in the most amazing and miraculous happenings, where entire movements have been formed because these people died in just such a way, and left behind just such a legacy, I suppose you could say, an artifact of themselves, that, like this one person I'll make note of here, a young lady who died in a car accident, but she left behind a note. She didn't write, it wasn't like a suicide note, it was her diary, but there was a note in the diary that had her bucket list, and it was a huge bucket list, and it had so many amazing things in it, like wonderful, great things that people could do to help aid humanity overall, in the long run, like outstanding running measures by which people could be of assistance to the global community ultimately, and to life itself in general, to the very planet. And she died, and she left behind this note, and when people read this note, they shared it online, and people all over the world started doing these things. They started fulfilling the items on her bucket list, checking them off in her honor. And it's just like, it seems like people might come here, and speaking to the examples wherein people lose themselves altogether, spotters such as myself see this happening, and it pushes us to fight. It could push us towards wanting to give up because of how sad and disturbing it actually is, but in my case at least, this is pushing me to fight. This is motivating me to pick up and fight, and to put in even more effort into it. And so it seems like people in these cases might actually be coming here for the sake of sacrificing themselves as martyrs for the greater cause. And what's even more disturbing, deeper beneath that, is the fact that it works. The fact that this works. And people, it's like that we should require people to be martyred in order for us to take action in this regard. That comes across as very sickly and disturbing, and it just elucidates how deep and traumatic this particular circumstance actually is. We need to pick up the ball. We need to fight together here. And so we're going to be launching this network-wide event, as I had stated. We're going to work together to effectively elucidate this factor for everybody, to get us all in play, to try and broaden our reach with the channel especially, and with the initiative overall, so that we can run these experiments and hopefully begin to turn this around. Because I think if people just take a look at this, I mean, that's all it should really take. It's common sense. If people can see this happening, it's again, it's the frog in boiling water scenario, wherein we don't realize how hot the water's getting until we're fucking boiled. That's what's happening. We need to just become aware of it, help others become aware of it. We need to wake up all together, collectively. So I'm gonna cap this one off with that, because I need to make another video tonight. But I do want to say that this video is dedicated primarily to Joyce Ann Seegers, to Lauren Hall, to new guy Noah. I don't recall his last name, but dude, if you're watching, very happy to have you aboard. This was inspired in part by you, so thank you for that. This video is dedicated to them, and of course you, everybody in the directive, everybody that works with me, everybody that's up front in this, everybody that's taking the front line, taking the vanguard, getting in play here. I love you guys. Thank you all for watching. That concludes this installment of the Approaching Nowhere course. We will continue with the investigation post-haste, likely tomorrow night, but maybe tonight. Anyways, love you guys again. Thank you all for watching. Kilo Salai, Teriuni Siari. Namaste.